Well, good morning. I'm going to invite the ushers down. They have a Bible and some bulletins that they would love to make sure we get into your hands. A Bible so that you can follow along with us and all that we've got going on in Scripture this morning, and then a bulletin just so you can keep track with what we've got happening here at LifePoint in our various areas of ministry. I also want to draw your attention to the seat backs in front of you. There is a white connection card there that we want to make sure that you are able to fill out. And if you are new to LifePoint, we would love to have you drop that off at our connection hub in the lobby. We want to give you a gift, just say thank you for being here this morning, but it also helps us just know what's going on with you guys. And in the various places we can join alongside you in prayer, we would love to be able to do that. So if you flip it over on the back, there's a place for a praise or a prayer request. We would love to be able to pray with you guys. Next week, Pastor Chris will be back. We'll be jumping into a new series next week. But this week, we are going to finish up our series that we've been working through this month in the month of July. And I'm going to start off by inviting you into the world of student ministry. We are going to look this morning at some memes. And if you have no idea what a meme is a picture or a video that is essentially used as a template. And then the internet has the opportunity to basically caption that picture or that video. And because the internet is a really weird place, there's some really weird memes out there. But I asked some of our students, send me your favorite Christian memes. I want to incorporate them in this week. And so they sent me some, and I don't think they disappointed me. So let's just start off. Here's the first one. This is a glimpse into student ministry, the difference between a youth pastor greeting students and adults. There's a much different way that we say hello to each other compared to adults. I just love that. The switch is so good on that one. So I love that one. The second one is maybe one that you experienced this morning when it was time to greet someone. When you turn and the person next to you turned the other way and you don't really know what to do. I have no idea what that creature is. It is absolutely terrifying, though. The next one is another glimpse into what happens on a Thursday night. Don't go over there, and invariably, that is exactly where they're going to go. The form on that cat's jump is fantastic, though. So, and then the last one for us to look at is where it kind of ties into where we've been. I don't know the context of this picture. I have no idea what is happening. I don't know why there's a giant Shrek statue. I don't know why people are bowing down to it. And I certainly don't know why Spider-Man is looking at it. But at least it gives us a glimpse of basically what the Old Testament is all about. And this is particularly important for where we are looking this morning and the king that we are looking at this morning, because this is a glimpse, essentially, into the life of the King Ahab. And so we're going to be in there. This whole month, we've been looking at various kings and how they ruled Israel. And there's been this phrase that has been woven throughout that says they either did what was right in the eyes of the Lord or they did what was evil in the eyes of the Lord. Now, to help us kind of understand what is the criteria, because as I've read through the stories, like last week, Derek talked about King Asa, and it says he did right in the eyes of the Lord, but then you watch his life just kind of unravel, and you go, did he really do what was right? And so what is the criteria that we're looking at when we talk about whether they did right or they did evil? Now, the people over at the Bible Project, if you've not heard of the Bible Project, I highly recommend it. We have a fan. I'll make sure I relay that message to them. They make these fantastic videos that help unpack what is happening in the Bible, because there's a lot of stuff that it's easy for us to miss, and they help explain it, if you will. And so they do a video for every book of the Bible. They combine 1st and 2nd Kings because originally those two books were together, and then we separated them out later. So this is the description. I snagged this screenshot of, here's the criteria of the kings. Were they faithful to God? Did they worship God alone, Yahweh alone? Secondly, did they get rid of all the other idols that were in Israel? Did they get rid of all the other influences that were around at that time? And third, did they remain faithful to the covenant that God had established with his people? So all of the kings are judged by these criteria, and as you read through the stories, you kind of see these boxes get checked or not. And this is what determines whether or not the king was good or evil in the eyes of the Lord. Now, you'll see underneath there, the kingdom of Israel is broken up into two. You have 10 tribes in the north and 2 in the south, and there's a scorecard, essentially, of how the kings did. In the northern kingdom, Not good at all, right? 0 out of 20. Even if you're a baseball fan, that's a terrible batting average. Like you don't even get it success in that area. The southern kingdom had a little bit more success, but if you look at Israel overall, 8 out of 40 kings were good, which is not great, which is why this kingdom, the time of the kings, was not a great era in Israel's history. Now, today we're going to look at King Ahab. He was king of the northern kingdom of Israel, and you can already see, based off that, he's not going to be a good king. But just how bad was Ahab? That's where we're going to look this morning. So if you have your Bibles, I'd encourage you to turn to 1 Kings chapter 16, or if you follow along on the YouVersion app, you can turn there as well. We're going to look at verse 29 and 30 to start off this morning. It says, in the 38th year of Asa, king of Judah, Ahab, son of Omri, became king of Israel. So you think back to it, Derek last week talked about King Asa. In the 36th year of King Asa is when things just kind of started to go bad. And so while all that's happening down in the southern kingdom, you have Ahab taking up rule in the northern kingdom. And it says he reigned in Samaria over Israel 22 years. Ahab, son of Omri, did more evil in the eyes of the Lord than any of those before him. So right off the bat, we learn that not only was Ahab bad, he was literally the worst king they had ever had. Like, this is not a good guy at all. But what made him so bad? We got to keep reading in order to find that out. Verse 31. He says, he not only considered it trivial to commit the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, but he also married Jezebel, daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Sidonians, and he began to serve Baal and worship him. He set up an altar for Baal in the temple of Baal that he built in Samaria. Ahab also made an Asherah pole and did more to arouse the anger of the Lord, the God of Israel, than did all of the kings of Israel before him. What a way to be known, right? Like, that is not what I want to be known for, but this is Ahab. Ahab took the sins of Jeroboam, and this is in 1 Kings chapter 13. Jeroboam was kind of like the first really bad king. He basically let anybody be a priest that wanted to be a priest. They did not follow God's law at all. And it says that Ahab looked at that and was like, that's not a big deal. Let's take it a step further. And so he brings in the god of the Sidonians, sets up a temple and an altar for it, and in this process marries Jezebel, who is the princess of Sidon. I want to say Sidonia every time, but it's not. It's the princess of Sidon, and she hates the God of Israel. She wants to kill all the prophets of God in Israel. She wants Israel to worship Baal alone. And Ahab is like, that sounds great. Let's go for it. And because of all of this, all we know about Ahab, based off of these verses, that one, he was terrible, worst king ever, and he did more to arouse the anger of the Lord than any king before him. And so we see this heart issue that I want us to look at today. Because in this time, as the kings are doing their thing, right, there's criteria for them. And when they don't live up to that criteria, God brought about these prophets. And the prophets had their own role, which was either to support the king as he moved the people closer toward him, or to keep them in check and to call them out and to not allow their sin to get too out of control. So at this point, we have one of the more famous prophets in the Bible, Elijah. And so you can see Elijah's role is to speak on God's behalf. He is to be a covenant watchdog. He's supposed to make sure that they have their eyes on that covenant, to continue to live that thing out, and to be called out on their idolatry and their injustice, and then to repent, to turn back to God. This is the role of the prophet. So you have a king who is not good, and you have a prophet who's trying to correct him, and as you can imagine, they don't get along very well. Ahab doesn't like Elijah at all. His wife doesn't like Elijah at all. He's a prophet of God. They're trying to kill all the prophets of God. This creates some tension. Add to it that Elijah has made it not rain in Israel. He said, it's not going to rain, which for an agriculture society is not good. Not good at all. So Ahab is frustrated at that. Because also you add on to it that Baal was the storm god, so he's supposed to be able to control the rain, and God's like, nope, and he looks kind of foolish in all of this. It's not just Ahab. Yeah, Ahab's heart has been turned away, but his turning away has also led the people into a really difficult position. They're stuck between two ways of thinking and who to worship. And so you have this conflict that comes up in 1 Kings chapter 18, where Elijah's going to go to Ahab, and he's going to call him out. And he goes to Ahab, and Ahab has been so blinded. Ahab's heart has been turned so far away from God that he interacts with Elijah, and he sees Elijah as the bad guy. He sees the prophet of God as the bad guy. That's how far his heart has been turned away from God. And Elijah says, actually, you are the problem. You are the one who is ultimately the problem in Israel because you have decided Baal is who we're going to worship. We're going to forget the God of Israel. We're going to worship Baal. And this is all happening as a result. So Elijah says, let's have a showdown. You get all the prophets of Baal, about 450 of them. You get them all together, all represent the prophets of God, and we'll have a showdown to see which God is real and which God is worth worshiping. So Ahab agrees, let's have that. The odds are in their favor. And so he said, here's how we're going to do this. We're going to each set up an altar. And the only way that we are going to know whether or not our God is real is our God is going to rain down fire from heaven and burn up the sacrifice. That's how we'll know whose God is real, which sounds awesome. Right? So you have all the people of Israel come out to watch it. They want to see what's going to go down. And Elijah, in his role as prophet, also has a responsibility for the people. So in chapter 18, verse 21, Elijah went before the people, and he said, how long will you waver between two opinions? If Yahweh is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him. What are you going to do? Who are you ultimately going to follow? Because right now, you're just kind of wavering between two opinions. You're not remaining faithful to the covenant. You're not holding up your end of the deal. You are lost. Pick a direction. And we see just exactly where the heart of the people is at because they don't say anything. They don't respond. They just kind of stand there. And so Elijah moves on. He lets the prophets of Baal go first, and for hours, they're dancing around, calling on Baal, light the fire. They're doing whatever thing that they do in order to get Baal to show up, and nothing is happening. Elijah, as the longer this goes, gets more and more confident. He starts mocking them, like maybe he's in the bathroom, or maybe he's asleep. He's getting some courage up now. He's like, yeah, this is going to happen. And so as that happens, the prophets of Baal get more and more frustrated, and I got to show my devotion, and they start cutting themselves to show their devotion to Baal. Look at how devoted we are, and nothing happens. So hours and hours go by, nothing happens. The prophets are embarrassed. Elijah's full of courage. He's like, all right, my turn. Here's how we're going to do this. The best way to light a fire is to throw a bunch of water on the wood, so let's do that. One, we're in a drought, so I'm just going to waste a bunch of water right now. Right? We're just going to pour it out. And then he's going to do it again and again. So much so that he digs a trench and it's full of water. He puts a moat around his altar. He's like, let's see if God is actually going to show up. Because he can't, this is not a trick. Like, he can't do anything. He has made it incredibly more difficult for himself at this point. But before he prays, he says something that's really interesting. So at the time of the sacrifice, this is in verse 36 and 37, it says, at the time of the sacrifice, the prophet Elijah stepped forward and prayed, Yahweh, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel and that I am your servant and have done all these things at your command. Answer me, Yahweh, answer me, so these people will know that you, Yahweh, are God and that you are turning their hearts back again. Now, these verses show us the heart of what is really going on here. It's not just about the outward expression of their worship, it's what it has done to their hearts. And so Elijah, as prophet, says, listen, we need to address the heart issue here. Because God has always been concerned about the hearts of his people. If you read through the stories in the Old Testament up to this point, God is continually going after the hearts of his people. He's continually trying to warn them about what will happen if they let their hearts be drawn away by other people. He says, don't marry those people because they're gods. I don't want your heart to be drawn away. He continually tries to lay it before them and say, this is so important to me that I want you to protect your heart. But Ahab has decided that that doesn't really matter. He has allowed his heart to be formed elsewhere. He has said, I don't care about God. I don't care about what he wants to do in my life. I want to do my own thing. I want to pursue my own concerns, my own desires. Like, that's what I want to go after. But it doesn't just impact him. His heart isn't the only one that's been turned away. He also has to answer for the hearts of the people. Now, earlier, as we look at the stories, as God's concern for his people is there, he sets things up that help his people refocus, if you will. So you read through the Old Testament, and something will happen, and a lot of times they'll institute a festival or a feast. And this is God's way of saying, I want you to remember who I am and who you are in relation to me. I want you to remember, this is who I am. This is what I have done for you. And in turn, I want that to fuel your devotion for me. I want you to be reminded of how important you are to me and how much I want to see you as my people thrive. I want to bless you so that you can bless the rest of the world. And so he does it through festivals and feasts. He does it through sacrifices. He says, when you sin, when you go after these other things, it impacts your heart. And I want to set up different things that allow your heart to come back to me. I want to make it so that we can be in relationship again. I want you to remember who I am and who you are in relation to me. And there's also prayers that they would pray. One of those is found in Deuteronomy chapter 6. It says, verse 4, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. We see here God's desire for the people of Israel to be fully devoted to him, to love them with his whole heart. But what's interesting is that at this point in time, the people had no idea that the thing that was in our brain, that was in our head, did anything that we know it does today. They didn't know about neurology. They didn't know that that was the source of like where we think and how we do things. For them, it was all of the heart. So they knew that the heart had a physical aspect to it because they could feel it beating in their chest. But they also saw this is the place like where my emotions come from. This is where my heart, my thoughts come from. This is where my desires and emotions, all of these are like the center of human existence. And they all originate from the heart, which puts a different perspective on what it means to love God with your whole heart. It's not like we tend to think about it, where it's just feeling the right things. It's about so much more. It's this all-encompassing aspect of who we are and what it means to be human. And these verses became known as the Shema, this prayer that they would pray twice a day, in the morning and in the evening. For what purpose? Why would they pray this twice a day? It was intended to be a formative experience for the people. It was intended to be something that formed and shaped who they were. Again, reminding them of who God is. The Lord our God, the Lord is one. That was intended to remind them of how their God was different from all the other gods in the region. And secondly, that they were to love God with their whole heart. That was their relation to him. And so twice a day, there was this reminder of this is who God is and this is who we are. As a way of reminding them, this is how I need to see the world. This is what I need to run through the filter of all of the things that I experience. And verses 6 through 9 kind of go through why this is important. He's like, hey, you guys need to talk about this all the time. Impress it on your kids. Talk about it wherever you go, because these are who you are as God's people. This is what it means to be a follower of God, his people who shape the world. Tim Mackey, who's a professor and one of the founders of the Bible Project, he says every day God's people are called to devote to God their whole body and mind, their feelings and desires, their futures and their failures. This is what it means to love God with your whole heart. And what we see with Ahab is that he chose to be formed and shaped elsewhere. He chose to let power, political power, shape him. He let his relationships with people like Jezebel shape him. His personal desires and motivations shape him. And I don't think Ahab set out to be the worst king in Israel's history. But without intentional formation, that's what happened. Slowly but surely, those things became the things that formed and shaped his heart, his desires, his thoughts, and his actions. And he not only led himself away, he was also leading the people away. And I read stories like this and I go, I'm so much better than Ahab. Like if Ahab would have just been more like me, none of this would have happened. Israel would have had at least one good king because I know what I'm doing. But if I were to even add in what Pastor Chris talked about in our last series, he's on my thank God I'm not like him list, right? Like he's not what he should be. But the more I think about what the role of the Bible is, I think more and more that it's a picture of the human condition. It's not saying, hey, go be like Ahab or anything like that. It's saying when people are left to their own devices, this is the natural inclination of their heart. When people don't choose to be formed and shaped by Jesus, they will naturally have unhealthy relationships with power, with relationships, with all of these other things that form and shape us week in and week out. And so to be human is to be formed and shaped by the things that we fill our lives with. Now, Ahab is an example of what it looks like, and I go, I don't worship idols. Those things don't really exist anymore. But Tim Keller has an interesting way of looking at idols, and I want to read to you his definition. He says, an idol is anything more important to you than God. It's anything that absorbs your heart and imagination more than God, anything you seek to give you only what God can give. An idol is whatever you look at and say in your heart of hearts, if I have that, then I'll feel that my life has meaning. Then I'll know I have value. Then I'll feel significance and security. There are many ways to describe that kind of relationship to something, but perhaps the best one is worship. And so I look at my life and I go, I don't know that that's actually, I don't worship idols, but if I'm honest, if I take stock of what I fill my life with, and I look at my actions, I don't know that there's a better word to describe what I do than worship. That I continually worship these things other than God that offer some sort of alternative means of security or pleasure or power or success. I let my heart get turned away by things that aren't necessarily bad, but they aren't Jesus. And so that slight turning over time impacts what is forming and shaping my life. But the thing is, everybody worships. There's no one who's immune to it. It's not something that just Christians do or people who are religious. It's something that everybody does. And David Foster Wallace was a writer, a philosopher, and he gave this commencement speech at Kenyon College in 2005. I want to read to you what he said. He said, in the day-to-day trenches of adult life, there's actually no such thing as atheism. There's no such thing as not worshiping. Everybody worships. The only choice we get is what to worship. And the compelling reason for maybe choosing some sort of God or spiritual type thing, be it Jesus Christ or Allah, be it Yahweh or the Wiccan Mother Goddess or the Four Noble Truths, or some inviolable set of ethical principles, is that pretty much anything else that you worship will eat you alive. If you worship money and things, if they are where you tap real meaning in life, then you'll never have enough. You'll never feel you have enough. It's the truth. Worship your body and beauty and sexual allure, and you will always feel ugly. And when time and age start showing, you will die a million deaths before they finally grieve you. On one level, we all know this stuff already. It's been codified as myths, proverbs, cliches, epigrams, parables, the skeleton of every great story. The whole trick is keeping the truth up front in daily consciousness. Worship power, you'll end up feeling weak and afraid, and you'll need ever more power over others to numb you to your own fear. Worship your intellect, being seen as smart, you'll end up feeling stupid, a fraud, always on the verge of being found out. But the insidious thing about these forms of worship is not that they're evil or sinful, it's that they're unconscious. They're default settings. They're the kind of worship you just gradually slip into day after day, getting more and more selective about what you see and how you measure value without ever being fully aware that that's what you're doing. And this is written and said by a man who doesn't know Jesus. But he understands something deeply important about who we are as people. We're not always aware of the things that are forming and shaping us. We have been taught by our culture and by our settings and our environment to just go at a certain pace. You go through routines, you have rhythms, you have practices, and without really thinking about it, these things form and shape our hearts in ways that we don't even know about. And so it's not that we're intentionally this way, it's just if we're not intentional, if we don't actively pursue being formed and shaped by Jesus, it's so easy to look like the culture around us and to think everything is okay. And so, in this sense, we have to look back at Ahab. He didn't intentionally form himself. He didn't actively pursue being formed and shaped by Yahweh. And his heart was turned away. James K. Smith wrote a book called You Are What You Love, and he says this: Christian worship, we should recognize, is essentially a counterformation to those rival liturgies we're often immersed in. Cultural practices that covertly capture our loves and longings, miscalibrating them, orienting us to rival versions of the good life. And this is why worship is the heart of discipleship. So what he's saying is, if this is true, if there are things that form us and shape us that we don't even know about it, then what we do here on a Sunday morning is of an extreme importance. Because what we're doing is we're setting out an hour of our life and we're saying, the culture, the world around me doesn't get this hour. For this hour, I'm going to let Jesus be the one who forms and shapes my life. I'm going to choose to push back. Counterformation is a pushing back against the things that are forming us and shaping us, being intentional about what it means to be followers of Jesus. Not just blindly going through and letting whatever happens, but instead saying, this is who I'm going to intentionally allow to form and shape my heart. But here's the problem. 1 hour a week isn't enough. An hour a week is not going to be able to resist the onslaught of things that come at us week in and week out. The average person experiences 30,000 ads a day. An hour can't compete with that. An hour can't compete with the rhythms and the routines that we have spent years and years and years letting form and shape us. Think about the way we go through our lives. Think about how often we go through a day and go, what just happened? I spend so much of my time just trying to survive the day, letting it happen to me. And Jesus is saying, I want to form and shape you in the midst of it all. And so for thousands of years, people have been trying to figure out, how do we do this? How do we create space? How do we push back against the culture? There's a lot of different titles for it, but one of them is simply just spiritual disciplines. And these spiritual disciplines are so important because so much of our life, if you're like me, my relationship with Jesus has begun to adopt all the other ways that I approach my life. So everything in my life has a means to an end, right? I eat healthy so I don't get fat. I exercise so I don't die early. I do this so that this happens. And if I'm not careful, I follow Jesus so that I go to heaven. Or I follow Jesus so that I feel better. And we have commodified our relationship with Jesus without even knowing it. We treat it the same way we treat everything else. But here's the important thing for us to remember. Jesus is not a means to an end. Jesus is the end. Jesus is the goal. The best thing about following Jesus is Jesus. And so then rather than trying to figure out what is Jesus going to do for me, we just simply desire to be with Jesus and to let him form and shape us into his likeness. And so just to highlight a few formations that we see expressed throughout church history, one of them is silence and solitude. I don't know if there's anything more offensive to our culture than quiet, right? Think about the noise is always there. We get in the car, we turn on the radio. We get home, we turn on the TV. We always have noise, podcasts, radio. And if it's not audible noise, it's visual noise. We always have a screen in front of our face. And it's forming and it's shaping us as people. And silence and solitude says, you don't get this time. You don't get this time. I'm going to sit and I'm going to let Jesus speak into my life in the quiet. I'm going to let him stir up things in my heart that help make me aware of who I really am in the places where he wants to form and shape me. So you have silence, solitude, you have fasting, which is offensive to a culture of consumerism that says more, more, more. You need to eat more, you need to have more. Come on, just more, whatever makes you happy. And fasting says, actually, no. What I need is I need Jesus. What I need to come to grips with is I need Jesus to be the thing that I see as the only thing that can satisfy me. And so I'm going to withhold eating for a time. And when I feel hungry, I'm going to ask Jesus to fill that void. And when I want to consume and when I want to have more, I'm going to say, I'm not going to consume. I'm going to let Jesus fill that space so that I learn to train my heart that it doesn't need stuff, it needs Jesus. You have prayer as just a way of communing with God. Mother Teresa, I love the way she was being interviewed, and they asked her, when you pray, what do you say? And she said, I don't say anything, I just listen. They said, okay, well, what does God say? She said, he doesn't say anything, he just listens. And if you don't understand that, I can't explain it to you, right? Like this picture of prayer is so different because it's not about saying the right things. It's not about asking for the right things. It's simply a desire to commune with God, to let Him form and shape our lives. Jesus kind of warned us that there's this temptation that we have to let our hearts be divided. And as He's teaching people the good news of the kingdom and what it looks like, He says in Matthew chapter 6, He says, listen, no one can serve two masters. You'll either love one and hate the other, or you'll be devoted to one and not the other. You can't serve both God and money. And maybe we need to replace the word money with something that really is more formative for us. Power, success, fame, whatever it looks like for you. Maybe we need to understand that Jesus is saying you can't serve both. He's echoing the words of Elijah that say, how long are you going to waver between two opinions? Either Yahweh is God, or it's power, success, money, fame, whatever. And so what I want us to close with is just a couple of questions. How can I choose this week to be formed and shaped by Jesus simply by choosing to be with Him, with no agenda other than to just be with Him? And secondly, what kind of counter formation needs to take place in my life this week so I can fully enjoy the life that Jesus has for me? Everything is trying to get us to buy into some version of the good life. And Jesus is saying, here's where life actually is. Here's where rest actually is. Here's where peace actually is. And so how this week can we be intentional about pushing back so that Jesus can form and shape our hearts?